Hello, welcome back everyone. Scootsy16 here with another video for Super Mega Baseball 4. Now, this is going to be another one of my tutorial videos. This is part 2 of chemistry and traits. Part 1 was more of a breakdown of how the system works, and part 2 is going to be digging into the strategy and a little bit more information around the traits themselves. So some really good information that we're going to be getting into here, but this is again a little bit more advanced as you start to roster construct and you're trying to maybe more maximize the players and the traits that they have. That's what we're going to be talking about today. So to get us started, I do want to kind of put a disclaimer out there. This is more so going to be just my perspective and my observations as I've gone through the game. By no means do I think that I'm perfect at it or that these are the only strategies that you can implement. There's absolutely so many more things that you can do with this game, and you are more than encouraged to look for different ways to play. More so, I want to get the opportunity to show you some of the strategies that I've implemented that have helped me to find success, and then help you to better understand how you can approach roster construction. So to get us started, I actually wanted to circle back to something that we talked about in the last video in part 1 and talk a little bit about the team roster construction as far as the potency of traits. One thing I forgot to mention, and I want to go to I think we'll go to this team right here. What I wanted to show to the group is I want to help you to understand when does the potency change. So on the bottom right hand corner here, you can see the number of players per chemistry, and you see all those white silhouettes of people, and then there's like the hollow silhouettes. This is what helps you to understand the trait potency. But sometimes you're like, well, how many players do I need to get to a certain tier? That's what those lines are that indicate after the second player column and then the sixth player column. That's where those come in. So to get us started, you'll see that our competitive traits, the orange traits, we have 3 of them, and they're getting a tier 2 boost. And that's because we have at least 3 players on the team that are competitive. What that means is if we have at least 3 players, we've hit the threshold, we now go into tier 2. And if we had 4, 5, or 6 players on the team that were competitive, it would still be in that tier 2 boost. It's not until we get to the 7th player, which you can see with our spirited traits here, like RBI hero, we actually have 8 players on the team that are spirited, which are helping us to get that maximum boost to that RBI trait. It does not matter how many players above 7 you have, it's still going to be that threshold that you meet. Meaning that if I had 10 players that were spirited or yellow, that would still be the same plus 30 power, plus 20 contact. If I have 3 to 6 players that are on the team that are in a certain chemistry or personality, in this case, we have 3 that are orange or competitive, then we're going to get that tier 2 boost no matter what. 3 to 6 players will always be a tier 2 boost. And then if I have 2 or less players of a personality, that's when you're going to see the chemistry drop to tier 1. But this is not only good traits not getting a boost here, so you can see tough out because we only have 2 players with the orange personality. They're only getting a plus 12 contact boost here. You'll also see that bad traits are going to get the maximum debuff. So Whiffer and Noodle Arm are at their worst because we have not gotten that orange trait up any higher. If we were to have a 3rd player on the team that's orange, we're going to see this go into the tier 2, which would be minus 25 contact and a major 2 times effect to that Noodle Arm instead of a huge 4 times effect. So good traits get the minimum buff when they're at tier 1. Bad traits get the maximum debuff at tier 1. But then you'll also see when you're at tier 3, and I'm sorry I'm bouncing around here a lot, but in tier 3, bad traits will get a minimum debuff. So our spirited or our yellow is at the maximum buff, or the good maximum tier 3. So that means our bad traits are getting a minimum debuff. So it's only a minor effect instead of major or huge. So I did just want to go over that. The thresholds for tier 1 are 2 or less players, gets you at tier 1 for any trait. 3 to 6 players will get you at tier 2, and then 7 or more will get you to tier 3 for any trait. So that's the first thing that I wanted to break down for you. The second thing I wanted to talk about was around your roster construction. And if, again, you take a look in the bottom right-hand corner, what you'll see is that we have one of those chemistries, spirited or yellow, that's maximum tier 3. And then every other one of those chemistries is sitting in the tier 2 range. This is kind of the prime zone you probably want to sit in. This allows you to have some of your best traits, or the most traits that you have. In this instance, I have 10 yellow spirited traits. So those are all going to get the maximum buff that they can, or the minimum debuff in this case for Wild Thing. So this allows you to get the most out of some of your traits, and then getting that tier 2 boost for the rest of your traits is kind of the normal structure that you'd want to implement. But there's actually another strategy that you can go about implementing, which would allow you to maximize even more of your traits. So in this example, you'll see on the right-hand side that we have spirited or yellow and disciplined or purple, both in tier 3. So you can also implement a strategy where you're maxing out even more of your traits. In this case, we have 22 traits that are getting a maximum buff on this team. What you will notice, though, is that when we start to go into this strategy of I want to max out 2 different chemistries, is that one chemistry is going to end up suffering. In this instance, it's going to be green or crafty that is getting that tier 1 buff, which means that it's not getting those traits are not very impactful whatsoever, but there's no other way to roster your, do construction for your roster to allow tier 2 for everything that's not tier 3. This is kind of the maximum strategy, because you can see, even if we were to take one of our competitive players and change them into a crafty player, we would still be at tier 2. So the max you can do here is two different chemistries that are tier 3. You can do 2 chemistries that are tier 2, and then 1 chemistry that will be tier 1. So I actually looked over my roster here as I was constructing it, and I opted to take the hit to my green or crafty trait. So that means pick officer doesn't do much. That means, stealer for Ricky Kwan isn't going to be very effective. And then Mind Gamer for Adeline Everett is not going to be very effective either. So this is kind of a sacrifice that I've opted to make. And that's because there's only 3 crafty traits or green traits. So I feel like it's not going to be as impactful as if I had maybe our orange or our competitive traits down to tier 1 instead. Those are decisions that you'll have to make for your team, but that's another part of the roster construction that you're going to work through as you're building a team. Okay, now, talking about the traits, I'm actually going to, I think if we go into our free agent pool and I add a new player here, I'm going to show you, there's Musty Overlord, what a name. I want to show you some of the traits that are in this game, and there's one key thing to be aware of. With some of these traits, you're going to notice that there are actual number values, and then other traits are not defined. So I'll give you an example of a number trait, and we're going to go down to Tough Out. So Tough Out here, which we've seen a few times in these videos, Tough Out shows that you get plus X number contact when batting with 2 strikes, which means in this scenario, plus 50 contact, or plus 25 contact, or plus 12 contact. We all know what that means. You can see what a player's contact is, you add 50, and that's what it will be in those 2 strike counts. But what you'll also notice is that there's these undefined boosts to your traits. So for example, with Sprinter, you'll see that it says increase running speed while running out of the batter's box. So right after I hit the ball, I take off, and my speed right out of the box is either going to have a small effect, a minor effect, or a major effect. And that's just a 1 times, 2 times, or 4 times. What does that mean? Well, we don't really have any data, or at least I don't have any data to determine what that is. But all I do know is that when they're running out of the batter's box, they are going to have that speed boost. And that would be what I'm boosting or impacting depending on what level tier my trait is at. You'll see things like this too. Cannon arm, increased throw speed when throwing with maximum power from the throwing mini game. So as I'm holding down the throw button, I stop at 99, then this is where cannon arm kicks in, and I either get a minor, major, or huge effect, which means like the ball's going to move even faster the stronger or more potent this trait is. So this is going to be a tough part of your determination, and it's probably going to be a little bit of tinkering and playing with these traits to better understand how they work, but that is going to be a big part of this. What I have noticed is that regardless of whether you are looking at a number or you're looking at a 4 times or 2 times or 1 times effect, I've seen that these traits are getting boosted exponentially as you get to the next tier. And what I mean by that is double 1 is 2, double 2 is 4. Take 12, multiply by 2, and you get to 24. They round up to 25. What's double 25? 50. So it's going to be so much more impactful when you jump from 2 to 3 versus when you go from 1 to 2. And so some of these traits at tier 2, which is kind of your normal safe zone, you could have a nice little boost to that. But when you get to tier 3, some of these traits kick in and are huge effects on you. So what you see here is plus 10 power and plus 15 contact is tier 2 on your first pitch of the at-bat, but plus 20 power and plus 30 contact is so much more significant and can really change what that hit will look like if you can make contact with first pitch Slayer. The opposite is true for things like first pitch prayer, for whiffer with 2 strikes instead of tough out, getting the boost. Here you're getting that debuff. The opposite of cannon arm is noodle arm. The opposite of durable, where you're going to have a slower fitness decay versus injury prone, where you're going to decay your fitness quicker, and then the slow poke, the opposite of sprinter. So that's just your competitive traits, and you can go into any customized player to then check out what these traits are and how they work. We're only looking at the offensive traits right now. So then as we look over here, we're going to see our spirited traits or our yellow traits. And again, some of these have defined boosts like this. It says all skills get a +3 when pressure is high. If the effect is double when pressure is extreme. Extreme is when you get to 4 red bars for your pressure versus just the 3, I think it's yellow bars, is when you're at high pressure. So in this situation, you're seeing that clutch can give you an extra boost. 3 to all skills, nice, but not very impactful. If it's extreme pressure, then it's +6. That's pretty nice. But if you get to tier 2, now it's +5 to all skills, which doubles to +10. And then if I get to tier 3, +10 to all skills, which would double to +20 in a high or an extreme pressure situation. Clutch is one of my favorite traits because of that. And usually you're in those high pressure situations, either in the playoffs or at the end of a game. And that's when you want your players to be at their best. And that's where clutch really kicks in and can make a huge impact. So again, what you're going to be seeing is that the impact that these traits have will vary depending on what they are, but you'll also notice that the potency really makes a difference in how valuable some of these traits are. Another thing to keep in mind as you're putting a team together and you're evaluating traits is going to be how often will a trait activate? That's going to be determining the value for you on whether you want a player with that trait. So I'll give you a quick example. Rally starter, it gives a +12 or +12 as a tier 1, 25 or 50 depending on the potency. Contact, when trailing and batting with the bases empty. So this would mean a scenario where it's, 3-1, my team is losing, and my player comes up to lead off the inning, and now we are trailing and the batter is coming up with the bases empty. That's when this is going to kick in. But if that player comes around the next time and we're still trailing, but now there's a runner on base, well, that trait's not going to kick in, even though that we are trailing. We also need the bases empty too. That's pretty uncommon, and that's going to be something where it can be nice to kick off an inning or to find yourself trying to catch up towards the end of a game. But I don't want to see this on my team for most instances because I don't see it happening very often. And I don't think it's valuable for that reason. You can also notice that like contact versus righties and power versus righties, there are more right-handed pitchers in the game by default versus your lefty pitchers. So contact versus lefty and power versus lefty, these are not as valuable as contact and power versus right-handed pitchers, just to give you some examples. RBI hero, this is you get that boost to both power and contact when we're batting with runners on second or third. This is something you hope happens a lot. You probably put them on your 3 or 4 hitter in the lineup so that your first, second player can get on base, get themselves into scoring position, and now RBI hero is going to activate. So that's going to be a pretty substantial situation where you want that to come into play. Same thing with clutch earlier. This is usually going to kick in during late innings or during playoffs where you really want your players to do well. That's when this trait becomes even more valuable because it's going to activate in those high pressure situations. There's also going to be other scenarios where I'm trying to think of, let's look at pinch perfect. So pinch perfect is a nice trait to have on a bench player. When they come up to bat, when they're pinch hitting, they'll get a boost in their power and contact just for that at bat. But if I have a starter in the lineup and they have pinch perfect, that's almost never going to come into play because they're never going to be pinch hitting, right? They're always going to be starting unless they take a day off, which how often does that happen for some of your better starters? So pinch perfect is going to be where does it make sense to have this on a certain player? Things like, I'm trying to determine if I had bunter on a player, but they're not very fast. It's nice if it's on a slow catcher who might be just doing a sacrifice bunt, but it's not going to be beneficial on a player that's not. We'll show you Buttons Bunterson in a second, who has this trait and can make very good use of it, which just essentially makes bunting the ball easier to do. And as I keep scanning through these, I'm trying to think of other scenarios where the frequency is not going to be very valuable. Stimulated means that there's a chance that you can get your player juiced for the final 2.5 innings of a game. And of course, the chances of that happening are going to depend on the potency. But you want to make sure your player is in the game in those last 2.5 innings for this to kick in. So for a reliever, this can be a nice trait to have because, especially on like a closer, they're going to be the ones being used at the end of the game, and this is where it's going to kick in the most. That's where I think this is going to be valuable. But if you put it on a starter, for example, starters don't usually make it to the 7th or to the 8th inning, and if they do, there's still a small chance that this will kick in, so it's not going to be that valuable. So keeping that in mind, again, what we're talking about is how frequently are these traits going to occur? That's what's going to impact the value of that player having those traits. And speaking of the value of having those traits, I also want to show you a couple of scenarios where you can use strategy to take advantage of these traits. So first off, I want to show you a player on my Heaters roster, and his name is Rash Weaver. And what you're going to notice is he has Slowpoke. So Slowpoke is him decrease running speed while running out of the batter's box. So anytime he hits the ball, he's going to be slow out of the box. Well, that would be a pretty negative trait on a fast player. I wouldn't want them to have slow poke. But in this instance, Rash Weaver's already slow. So getting this on him will decrease his value a little bit, meaning he would actually be worth more if he didn't have slowpoke. But I don't care that he has slowpoke because he's already slow. So I'm not negatively being impacted by him having that trait. Same thing you'll want to do in trying to find players that are already good at something get even better when you apply a trait. In this situation, you see Mashed Taters is already a really good hitter, but now in those RBI situations, he's going to have even more power and even more contact. So plus 30 power puts him at 127 power, essentially maxing it out, and then plus 20 contact puts him at 95 contact when runners are in scoring position. So it makes him even better because we're amplifying his already great talent. So those are some of the strategies that you'll want to think about when you are implementing your approach to building your team. And I'm trying to think of and thinking of some of the ways that you can find value through traits. Sometimes you can find very bad players that have good traits that you're going to maximize, and this makes them so much more valuable. So take a look at Pumper Lumpkins here. He is a D plus player. What D plus player do you want to have on your team? Mostly none, right? We're not expecting him to start. He's barely going to get any playing time, but take a look at the two traits that he has. He plays perfectly on this team where we're boosting yellow and purple traits, because even though he only has 16 contact, if we bring him in during a pinch hit situation, he gets against a left-handed pitcher, he gets contact versus lefty boost, which is plus 20. So now instead of 16, it's 36. Again, not great, but much better. And then he has maxed out fastball hitter. And fastball hitter is going to give you that power and contact boost when you're swinging against any fastball, four seam, two seam, or cut fastball. So this is a great scenario to have him come in during certain situations where he can maybe benefit us in his contact rating. And on top of that, I'm saving money on my roster by keeping him on this team. So I can spend a little bit more on Gary Crawford or Gwendolyn Foster, who are some of my more expensive players, because I have a guy like Pumper Lumpkins on the team that's much cheaper. So that's a really great strategy. I also wanted to show you another player, this one on the Otters. This is Elliot Cunningham, another player, C+. He's not that great. You can see he's about average across the board. He's not as bad as Pumper Lumpkins, but take a look at the traits that he has: clutch and stimulated. So this means that late in games, the last 2.5 innings, he has a 20% chance to become juiced, which will bump up all of his ratings. And on top of that, he is clutch. That means during the late games, he might also see that clutch boost as well as stimulated. So a player who's sitting pretty much right in the middle in all of these categories can quickly become one of the better players on my team in a perfect scenario. High pressure situation with stimulated, boosted, activated. Elliot Cunningham can become a huge threat on this team. And even Stump Bonilla, a center or a C-rated player, has clutch, which means that contact rating, which is the only good thing about him, can get much, much higher, can get plus 20 if it's an extreme pressure situation, gets plus 20 speed, gets plus 20 fielding, plus 20 arm. He becomes an actual viable player to have on the field and in the batter's box in those scenarios. So thinking about how you're putting your team together, you can find cheap players that have a trait that will align with your team chemistry and what you're trying to build. And that's something that you can very beneficially look forward to. Now, I also wanted to think about one other strategy, and that is signing players just for chemistry. So I want to go back over to my Buzzards team here, and I want to show you a player that I brought in solely because they're a chemistry fit for this team. So you can see a guy like Julius Hazard. What is he going to do on this team? pretty much nothing. He's got okay hitting skills. He's a good fielder, but no arm. There's really not a lot that you would like to see from him. So most instances, I wouldn't sign him. But because we were looking to boost our spirited or our yellow traits, I brought him in. Even though he has bad jumps, I don't care about that trait. He's cheap and he's going to have that spirited trait. On top of that, you see Pumper Lumpkins, another player that, again, he meets our chemistry, but he also has spirited, which means that I can have him help me get us up to 7 yellow or spirited traits, which will help me to get that boosted. And then the same thing with Super Samson here. Even towards the end of his career, he's up to 37 at this point, and he no longer can play all outfield positions, so he's becoming less and less valuable to me. But he's competitive. We needed at least 3 competitive players, so we brought him on the team. And that's going to be something that benefits us. And you can also see we brought in Rufus Zumar. We don't really care about that pick officer trait, but he was a competitive player, so he helped to get us to tier 3 in that area because I wanted to make sure that Cannon Arm and Workhorse and K Collector were going to be at their tier 2 boost instead of just tier 1. So again, the idea around how you structure your roster is going to come down to what is available to me and how do I make this work with my team. You want to build around your core pieces. So a core piece on this team is Gary Crawford. He has outside pitch and off-speed hitter. And not only that, but I also have fastball hitter on Alex Chambers. He's a great hitter for us that we want to utilize that trait for. So that means I really want to make sure I focus on those purple traits and get those maxed out. On top of that, if you take a look at our pitching staff, rally stopper, rally stopper, rally stopper, rally stopper, rally stopper, rally stopper, and clutch. These are some of the players that I was able to find that had those good yellow traits, and I wanted to make sure that I was building those up as much as I could as well. So there's going to be value on this team, and those good players are going to get even better. Those bad players are going to get to potentially good in specific scenarios. So you want to make sure you find your core players and start building around them. I'm trying to think of another team that I have here. Oh, yeah. Edison Midfield was my core player on this team, and he has both RBI hero and clutch. So yellow, that's exactly what I want to make sure I'm building up and going for. But you also see that I have the the green crafty traits maxed out too. Well, that's because I have Vladimir Guerrero with bad ball hitter. I have Ricky Kwan with Steeler here. You see reverse splits, reverse splits, reverse splits, reverse splits, reverse splits. I have so many pitchers on my team with reverse splits that I want to make sure that I'm maxing out those traits as much as possible. So there were going to be scenarios where I needed to find a player that will fit my chemistry, even though I wouldn't necessarily benefit from having them on the team. A guy like Brad Osmus was somebody I signed specifically because he was crafty. What you might find a struggle in doing when you're looking at your team, especially during the off season or when you're in a free agent period. Let me see if I can find a team that's active right now. Let's see. I don't think any of these teams are actually active right now. Oh, this team is. So let's take a look at the team roster construction here. So we look at our team, and okay, so do you see how we have, and there's a reason why I did this. It's not just because I'm going crazy here, but do you see how we have 7 scholarly traits, but we have that at tier 2? We would maybe want to look at getting one more scholarly player to come in and make our team better, right? And so I might look to see I have 2 players on my team that are purple, and I have one purple trait, which is consistent all the way here at the bottom, and I don't really need that. So I could replace this spirited player with a scholarly player right here could be an option to make a jump up Or even better here, if I bring in Amani Fields, not only am I bringing in a scholarly player to bump me up to tier 3, but I'm also bringing in a player that has a scholarly trait. So now that elite slider is going to become a scholarly pit or a tier 3 pitch as well. So this is a great way for me to take advantage of um, this this roster structure to make my team better. And if I were to do that, I might also find that I want to get my competitive traits to tier 3 as well. Maybe I want to make sure that first pitch Slayer gets a maximum boost in that slow poke because Shining Drake here is pretty fast, is getting a top tier boost and a minimum debuff. So that means I need to try and find a player to bring in that's going to help our team boost our competitive traits. So in this instance, I can look at this disciplined player, Adonis Connor, and I can look to see if there's a competitive player. Here's one with Towel Hole, which is a weird name. Or I could get somebody like, oh, nope, that's a starting pitcher. Let's see. So Towel Hole is the only one that is competitive that I could bring in. But let's say, for instance, he doesn't exist. And so I don't have any competitive players, but I want to try and find a way to bring in a competitive player. Do you see how we have 3 crafty traits, those green ones down in the bottom right hand corner? I might say I really want to bring in Lover Feynman, right? And he's a crafty player, but I want to keep that at tier 3. So I might go over here, look for one of my crafty players. Let's do Kamari Resplendent here. Crafty. We're going to go see if there is a competitive player, and there is Salvador Maloney. So I might say, you know what? I'm going to bring in Salvador Maloney, which is going to get me to that maximum buff of my competitive or orange traits. But now I'm dropping down to tier 1 for my green traits. I don't want to do that. So that's where I'm going to come back over to Adonis Connor, and I'm going to bring in Lover Feynman, and that's going to get myself offsetting those green traits. So this is a strategy that I'll implement a lot. I know this isn't the perfect scenario to see this, but I will try and find a different player to get rid of at a different position so that I can find the chemistry that I'm looking for. And then I will look to find a different player at another position to get myself back to where I was. So if I lost you with anything that I said here, because there was a lot that I just went over, I do ask that you please share with me in the comments section down below. What did I lose you with? Where do you have questions? What is it that I missed? What is it that didn't make any sense to you? And I can try and describe it to you. There's so much strategy and there's so much nuance to this game, which I think makes it so fun. And so it can be really difficult to explain through video format like this. But I tried to give you some good examples. I tried to make sure this is as clear as possible. I took notes to try and give myself a way to be concise with what I was saying. Please let me know if it makes sense. If I lost you, if I need to make a part 3 just to clarify anything, I'm happy to do that. From either the part 1 or the part 2 video. But thank you so much for watching. I hope this helps you, and I can't wait to hear any of your feedback in the comment section below, whether it's the way you constructed a roster was based on how I was able to give you some advice on that. Would love to hear any of your feedback there. But thank you so much for watching, and we'll talk to you all next time. Bye, everyone.